Evening's subject's all about, unsurprisingly, given the title, how to write an effective CV and make your LinkedIn profile work for you. That latter bit, LinkedIn that is, being really a reference to making it work in a job-seeking context. It's quite a deep subject, LinkedIn. If you really wanted to get serious about it, we're going to touch mainly on that. How do you make it work for you as part of your strategy to help get noticed and maybe leverage a moving career, a new job, whatever. The content is going to be fairly fast-paced in terms of its delivery. We've got an awful lot to get through to do the job properly. If you've ever tried to write your CV, it's not the work of a moment. Trying to tell people how to write it, it's not the work of a moment either. So I'm going to try and deal with the key issues, not every last detail, but the things that really make a difference. And I'm going to encourage you to give a long, hard think about what you've got on your CV right now. So there's going to be lots of sort of think about, ask yourself this, ask yourself that about your own CV, which hopefully will get the message across. In terms of who on earth we are, first of all, and I'll just go through this very briefly. I'm not an individual that just spends his day or evenings giving webinars. I work for a business, CV and Interview Advisors. We're a partner with Web Recruit, the people who've invited you to this evening's event, as we are a partner to other folk and institutions and memberships and associations. Our business is all about providing high-quality CV writing, LinkedIn profile writing, interview coaching, career enhancement, products and services to individuals or businesses that are interested in that. The main reason for mentioning that, other than obviously a hard commercial plug, is the fact that what I hope to convey is that we do know our stuff. It's a very subjective area, writing a CV and a LinkedIn profile. There's loads of advice out there, but I'm afraid to say not much of it is high quality advice and that will actually make a difference. But there is an awful lot of stuff, do this, do that, floating around. What I'll try and do this evening is focus on the stuff we know works, because we see it working. That's the key thing. More of that later. Again, my own background, not trying to big myself up, just trying to explain that I've seen CVs, how they're used, and latterly LinkedIn profiles from pretty much all the key angles. So I've been an employer working for a business recruiting people. I've been a recruiter, both permanent, contract, freelance markets. I've worked in this business for some years reviewing CVs. I must have reviewed a fair few thousand of them by now, and I've written a fair few CVs as well. So I hope that just gives the confidence that we didn't just wake up one day thinking let's talk to people about this and actually it not really having any substance in the marketplace. The rest of the team working here are similar. We have some published authors amongst our midst. Now from a writing content point of view, that's really important. It's actually a good point. I don't know whether they actually are fiction or fact writers, so slightly tongue-in-cheek. Fiction writer doesn't work so well, but just writing good content obviously is quite a skill. Again, if you try to write your own CV recently, doing it properly, it's quite hard. A lot of people get frustrated with it. Importantly, there are going to be a fair few cliches flying around this evening, I'm afraid, and one of those is hot skills. We're going to talk about them quite a lot. It's important you know what they are. Hot skills change and evolve over time. What was popular and relevant 15 years ago, 5 years ago, 5 minutes ago isn't necessarily so now in your particular job market, but it is really important you know what they are, because then you can align your document, as we'll see, to those skills in the marketplace. Bottom line is, we know what works, as I've said, in regard to a CV and a LinkedIn profile, how to get your message across. There's some fairly modestly controversial themes this evening, I guess, partly because many people will have had much information and guidance thrown at them already about their CV. Some of that might resonate tonight from my point of view in terms of what I'm telling you. Some of it may jar. Some of it you may think, can that be true? Well, that's for you to make your mind up about. But the important thing is we know stuff works out there. What we do does work and can make a difference, and that's the most important thing. To reinforce that point, somebody who actually attended one of these very webinars last month sent us a really nice note after we'd been able to help them with their CV and their message going out into the marketplace. and wrote this. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but you can just see it gives a fairly clear indicator that this person who'd actually been struggling for a number of years, not months, number of years, trying to get interest and attention, just by getting their documents sorted and pointing in the right direction, so to speak, it made a difference, fundamental difference to their success in the job market. And the controversial element, one of those aspects, is that you really do have to look at yourself as a product or service in today's market. That to some people sounds a bit mercenary, but I'm afraid it's true. Most employers have a problem they need solving. You potentially, as a candidate, employee, are a solution to that problem that they have. And you have to present yourself to the marketplace in that way, which is a large part of what we're going to talk about this evening and how to get that sorted. Okay, enough about the background and the whys and the wherefores. One of the important things, and therefore introducing this sort of self-diagnostic element to this evening's session, and question you should be asking yourself is, how do you figure out whether your CV needs any attention in the first place? So there'll be a mix of people watching, listening this evening. There'll be some people, there'll probably not be many of them in fairness, who are already aware that their CV works a treat. Why you're listening to tonight's session, I'm not quite sure, because you could be getting on with other things, but nevertheless there'll probably be some people who maybe send their CV out, pretty sure getting an interview, and you have the proof for that, the stats to back it up. That's the CV's job, is to get you in front of people, to get a discussion going, to get an interview. If that's happening enough times for you to be happy and ultimately to lead to an appropriate number of second interviews, assessment centres, job offers, whatever, if you're happy with that, then happy days, because that's what the CV's job is there to do. But there'll be people who either are very unsuccessful at that and know it and have the stats to prove it, a bit like that chap who sent us the email earlier, been struggling away, applying for jobs. Nobody's had the decency to say to them that their CV's atrocious and they really need to get it sorted out, because if they did, life would be better. And for them, it's always going to be an issue and a problem. We have a solution to that problem, or part of it, tonight. And there'll be others who may be about to go into the job market, or either in the near future or in the middle, longer distance, who just don't know whether their CV is going to hit the spot or not. And again, we're trying to give you some clues and some tools to use to assess that better. A fair few people will ask during this evening or at the end of the session, what difference does a good document make? Can it really make a difference? Can somebody writing my CV in a different way, or me sitting down and spending a little bit longer on my CV, actually make a difference? And our answer is an emphatic yes. I mean, you saw the proof there from the chap who emailed us last month. But on average, the stats we collect, you get your CV properly sorted, and you're looking at a substantial double-digit increase in interview success rate, hence the comment at the bottom of this slide in red. So when we're writing CVs for our clients, which is the only information we can accurately measure, on average, we're looking at a 30 to 50% increase. For some people, it's stratospherically above that. That chap earlier whose email we saw, percentage-wise, it's off the scale because they'd really been struggling. For some people, it's more modest. So the average lies in that sort of 30 to 50% band. Now that, in fairness, will apply to anybody. Anybody who gets their message better aligned to the target audience, which again we're going to be talking about shortly, and there's another one of tonight's cliches, will achieve a better result. Whether we do it, you do it, or anybody else does it, as long as it's done properly, it will make a difference, absolute guarantee. So some of the things that you should be asking yourself about your own CV, so you can start to evaluate whether you actually need to do anything at all, and then you can evaluate the task in hand. If you're going to market right now, or plan to go to market, or have recently gone to market with a CV that is in effect just a list of stuff, and again, this is slightly controversial in the sense most people say at first glance, well, what on earth is a CV if it's not a list of stuff? Well, in a way, that is part of the problem. Most people start their lives with a CV that is just a list of things: education, qualifications, maybe some work experience, how people get hold of them, hobbies and interests. And you may say, well, that is a CV. Surely that's what a CV is about. Well, it's a danger sign for reasons we'll come on to shortly. If, no matter when you left education, if you're still using a CV that is in effect the same structure that you had when you left that education, that is another warning sign. Time moves on, things change, expectations change, the market's shifted considerably. So unless you've just left education, literally within the last few months, it's not a great idea sticking with a format that maybe is 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years old. There are not many other mediums that have survived that length of time without needing to change and adapt. Hot skills, again, the cliche. As I've hinted at earlier, you have to align your document, your CV, your message to what the hot skills in the marketplace are. Now, if you've got a document that's just a list, I can pretty much guarantee you're not doing that. If you've got a document that's pretty much the same as when you left education, all you've done is added to it, you're probably not addressing anywhere near the right hot skills that are present in your marketplace. What those hot skills are, by the way, is often asked question during these events. Now, I can't actually give you every single one because there's people from all walks of life on tonight, across all sectors, industries, levels, but we'll talk a little bit more about them, give some examples so you can start to get an idea about some of this later. I hinted at this cliche earlier, but it's another one, hence why I put it in bold. Target audience. Who's your target audience? Well, it's a mixture of people. Some people don't actually understand this or realise who their target audience is, which is, again, another problem. So remember, you've got to send your CV more often than not to a recruiter of some description or an intermediary before it gets anywhere near the hiring manager. Even if the job application is via an employer directly, chances are the hiring manager, the person making the ultimate decision, is not going to see it first. So your CV's got to be positioned with those folk in mind. I'm going to talk about that a lot this evening. And perhaps the biggest message you should take away from this evening, if you only take one thing away from this evening, please take this message, which is that your CV should be presenting a business case as to why somebody should interview you, much less hire you. We'll talk a lot about what a business case is, but it's starting to hint and reaffirm this idea that you are a product or service to the marketplace. And if you don't present a logical argument to that marketplace as to why on earth somebody should be bothered to interview you, you will not be as successful as you'd like at getting those interviews. So unsurprisingly, and in some of the first steps to start asking yourself questions about your own CV and your message, bad CV is just a list of stuff. There's no substance. You're just saying, this is where I work, this is my job title, these are the things that I wake up in the morning to do and I'm paid to do, this is where I was educated, these are my hobbies and interests, this is how you get hold of me. If that's all you're going to market with, I would challenge that and say, unless you're very lucky or an exception to the rule, you'll not be as successful as you'd like to be. By building a business case, which is what we're going to spend a lot of this evening talking about, or this session talking about, you will materially influence for the better your chances of getting interviews for the jobs that you deserve to get interviews for. Second part of assessing your CV, what we call the acid test, which is a very easy stat to work out, but sometimes quite painful to have to accumulate the information to get the stats. And that is the bottom line for the reason for the CV to exist, and that is not to get you a job. A lot of people get mixed up with this. It isn't to get you a job. The CV's job in its own right is to get you interviews or engagement with the person making the decision about whether you progress to the next stage of the job application process. So if you've gone through the pain, as it were, of having to apply for jobs and getting rejected and rejected and rejected, you'll have the stats for this, and this is going to be quite easy to assess. If you're not in the marketplace yet, the best stab you can take is start to ask yourself all these questions I've been challenging you with and see how far adrift are you. And as we go through the detail later, just keep asking yourself the question, how close am I to this kind of ideal? How close am I to this best practice that this guy on the phone is talking about? Because if you're a long way from it, it'll suggest that your interview to application ratio is poor, and therefore you should do something about it. If you've been through the heartache of getting lots and lots of rejections, a couple of points. First of all, it's not personal, and lots of people, again, get wrapped up in the emotion of it all. The only reason you're getting rejected is because somebody's looking at the CV and not getting the message as strongly as you'd like them to, and that's to do with the message you're sending, nothing to do with you as an individual. If people are interviewing you and then not getting you to second interview or beyond, then I'm afraid the problem lies closer to home and may be an issue, but at least you know that. That's a little bit easier to figure out. what people bang their heads against the wall about sometimes is, why am I not getting interviews for these jobs which I know I can perform? So this acid test is all about, partly to do with the relevance of the job. So I'm assuming you apply for, let's say, 10 jobs. You know, heart of hearts, you could perform those 10 jobs. It might be a bit of a stretch, that's fine. But as long as you're not doing a supermarket checkout operator to nuclear submarine captain kind of career move, which is not going to happen whatever you do with your CV, as long as you're in the realms of the reasonable and the sane, then those 10 jobs, if you're not getting any interviews or you're only getting 1 or 2 interviews, guarantee, almost guarantee, problems with your CV. If you're getting 8, 9, 10 interviews out of the 10 applications, again, as I said earlier, happy days, you go off and do something else now, your CV's doing its job. If you're somewhere in the middle, it's a grey area, and of course it depends at which extreme you lie or which extreme you're pointing towards. So the 4, 5 out of 10, you might be happy with. That might give you enough second interviews. It might get you some job offers. If you're happy with it, fine. But if you're not, do something about it. So that's the key acid test. So if you've got the stats, you can work it out. Don't listen to people who are telling you there were better people in the marketplace, you're overqualified, underqualified. They're sometimes the truth, in fairness, but they're sometimes not. They're sometimes a smokescreen. Very few people will tell you to your face, and you'll know this already if you've been applying for jobs, that your CV is atrocious and you'll not get an interview until you sort it. People aren't interested in giving that kind of advice. It falls to people like us to have to tell people that kind of information, which is not particularly pleasant, but there are worse things in life. So really analyse the figures. If you're being told all these things, there might be some truth, a sliver of truth within the feedback you're getting, but it still doesn't resolve the bigger issue, which is you'll only get interviews if you present a strong business case to people as to why they should interview you. If they're not interviewing you, it's because you haven't presented them with a strong enough case. It doesn't matter whether there are 1,000 people applying for the job or 2. If you've got a strong business case, you will automatically rise to the top X%, and you will always stand a better chance of getting interviews. So keep an eye on that stat. And key message, if you've got a problem with that and it's holding you back, do something about it. And we go mental sometimes trying to get this message across. You've got 2 options. Do it yourself. This evening will help. Get help. Much like any other problem, there's always people who can help you. On to the structure of a good CV. This is not a default setting that you should rush to try and achieve overnight. This is not to say following this structure is going to make the difference, because as with all these things, it's all about the content. But typically a structure of CV that we know works in the marketplace and makes it easy to describe some of the key things this evening, like building a business case, will follow the kind of headings you see on the screen right now. But I stress, it isn't essential you follow this to the letter. By far and away, the more important element is the content which we're going to describe. The top 3 sections are key to forming this business case that I've been going on about, and I will go into more detail very shortly as to what forms this business case, this compelling message that your target audience will find more informative and insightful. So we're going to talk about each of these sections on the CV, but we're going to spend most of the time talking about the highlighted red areas, the top 3 areas. And again, I said strongest message, biggest message you should take away from this evening is get your CV to build a business case. So it follows get the 3 areas of the CV that we're going to spend most time talking about right, you'll have accomplished that. Okay, let's take a look at each of these areas, but focus on the top 3. So the first one is what we tend to call, again, doesn't matter what you call it within reason, what we tend to call a professional or executive summary. Now, I will show you not only some content very shortly, but also a real-life CV, as it were, in this format. So you start to see how it all hangs together, but I've got to tell a story to get there before launching you straight into that. So this opening statement, lots of people have an opening statement on their CV. So again, ask yourself the question, what are you opening up your CV with other than your name? And I literally do mean other than your name and possibly a couple of phone numbers or a phone number and email. Anything other than that, and including that, I mean address, think hard about. If you've got lots of personal details at the top of your CV, that's not a good thing to have for reasons that will become clear shortly. So this is a statement that introduces the individual. Lots of people will have them. Some of you might have them called professional profiles, personal summaries, profiles, personal statements, career objective, all sorts of weird and wonderful titles. But as ever, it's the content that matters. Now, one of the things that you really do need to do very quickly, and I will show you an example shortly, is explain to your audience, so remembering that they've picked up your CV visually on paper or on a screen, and they've maybe had, again, which a lot of people forget, 50, 100, 150, 250, sometimes over 1,000 applications for the same job. If your opening statement just reads like most people's, and by most people's I'll give you some examples shortly, then you're just going to appear as being one of many people and possibly not really conveying a strong sense of you've got something to offer this employer or recruiter. So we always recommend you open up your statement and very quickly explain to your target audience what on earth you are by generic job title or specific job title or some kind of describer that explains what you are profession-wise. So if you're, and this is a bit of a clue in terms of what's coming in the example, shortly you'll see, if you're a finance director, it's a fairly generic title. So calling yourself an experienced finance director is reaffirming to your target audience, the recruiter, the employer, the hiring manager, whatever, that you are in the right space for that particular job. If you're a welder and you're applying for a finance director job, you're going to get weeded out pretty quickly, and you'll be surprised how many people are that extreme. You'll get all sorts of time wasters applying for jobs for whatever reasons, good or bad, but they bung up the system. And as a recruiter, it's really frustrating because you know amongst that 150 applicants there are some gems, but you've got to fight your way to find them. And you'll also know that a good proportion of the applicants are in no way qualified to do the role. And if your CV is not compelling enough, it's so easy for you to be tarred with that brush. And a lot of people just don't realise that. They assume wrongly they're up against people of like mind, like qualifications, that the truth will out. And I'm afraid for reasons we'll shortly see, it just doesn't. Not always, anyway. So describe what you are. It sounds very obvious, but ask yourself the question, are you making it clear on your CV within the first couple of sentences of any meaningful text other than your name? Are you telling people what you actually are? Would guarantee most people aren't. Another cliche, I'm afraid. What is your value proposition? Again, I'll show you an example very shortly, but these are the constituent parts you've got to provide on your CV, and therefore you've got to sort of think about this before I show you an example. The value proposition for anybody is it's not unique proposition, because most people don't have a unique proposition these days. It's what you're on this world to do at this moment in time for an employer, crudely. If they're going to invest 25, 35, 55, 95,000 quid in you every year, it's the biggest reason as to what return on that investment you're going to give. If you don't know that, you need to figure that out pretty quickly. If you do know it, you need to get that message across pretty quickly on your CV. Linked to that are a handful of things that most people tend to have, however experienced or inexperienced they are, that they're pretty good at within the confines of the job that they have. Now, at this point, a lot of people who maybe are recent graduates or have very little experience trembling and thinking, well, I don't have any of these things. To reassure you, you do actually. It's just that you've probably not been told what they are or imagined how you can present what you do have more effectively. So everybody can explain what they are. Everybody has a value proposition, and everybody has something that they're particularly good at. Figuring those things out sometimes is a bit of a challenge, but it's technically very possible and true of everybody. And then the trick is aligning all of those things with what the marketplace is looking for. So imagine that you've just bought, just to try and reinforce the point, if you've just bought a car, a house, any high-priced ticket item, maybe even a low or medium-priced item, highly unlikely you just wandered into the shop, decided to buy it without any information or persuasion until you made the purchasing decision. And you're a bit like that as an individual. As I said earlier, somebody out there has got a problem they need solving. The way they're going to solve it is to recruit somebody. They're only going to recruit somebody they feel, based on whatever criteria they're using, is going to solve their problem. So whenever you bought your car, you believed it was going to solve a particular problem, make you feel better, whatever. When you bought your house, washing machine, hi-fi, if anybody buys hi-fi these days, telly, whatever. You bought it for a set of reasons. Maybe it took you a while to consider it. You reviewed information, looked at reviews, but you were encouraged to follow a course of action based on some criteria or other that resonated with you. You have to treat yourself the same way. Promise you an example. Here is one. So again, I'm not going to read this verbatim. You can read it yourselves. But the important thing here is this is an opening statement. This would appear at the top of somebody's CV. It doesn't matter what level you are, how experienced or not you are, what sector you work in, what job title you have. None of that matters. Anybody, anywhere, can write something like this. So this is very good at describing what this person is. Experienced finance director. What's their value proposition? Well, it sort of hangs around this ability to protect cash flow and profitability. What are they good at? There's a list of things. Is it aligned with hot skills in the marketplace? Well, we have to assume so. It certainly sounds quite impressive. Talks about all sorts of things that would appear to be relevant, but we just don't know that. We don't know the individual concern and we don't know the job, but we can imagine it being relevant. So the important thing here is that, and to draw a comparison with most people's statement that I see on CV. So bear in mind, every day of the week I'm getting sent CVs to review, and some of them, not all of them, some of them will have an opening statement of some description, and you'll know if you've got one of these yourselves. The trouble with most people's statements at the top of their CVs are they're a long way adrift from this. What they tend to talk about is their levels of enthusiasm, commitment, dedication, the wonderful interpersonal skills, their ability to work in a team or as an individual. Lots of lovely, admirable skills, but they're all behavioural, and they also share another horrible trait, which is they're almost impossible to prove on a CV. Just ask yourself the question, think about it yourselves. You're a recruiter, you sat down, you've got 150 CVs to go through, and they're all claiming, which most of them do, that the individual is truly committed, enthusiastic, and all those other lovely things I mentioned. How do you know whether the person is any more or less enthusiastic than the person you've just seen or reviewed CV of, or the next person's CV you were just about to review? You can't possibly judge that as a recruiter. Where still the individual can't possibly prove it on their CV. There is no recognised industrial score, international score for enthusiasm, unfortunately, or ability to work in a team or as an individual. So if anybody can prove any of those things on a piece of paper, reasonably, without it looking rather odd, then they ought to get a prize, because I've never seen it. Nobody I know has ever seen it. And to argue that, yes, but it could be proven at interview is fair enough. Some of it could be proven at interview, not all of it, some of it could. But if you're getting the interviews, that's great. If you're not, what do you do? Well, the first thing I'd suggest is root out all the rubbish on your CV that claims to have all these skills, because it's not doing you any good at all. So it is a bit controversial. A lot of people sort of think, well, hang on a minute, I've been told that Joe Bloggs, the recruiter, is looking for these skills. Well, they are, but they're not assessing enthusiasm, dynamism, commitment, my ability to give 110% or to work in a team or as an individual. They're not assessing any of that via the CV, so putting it on the CV is wholly pointless. They'll be assessing those qualities at interview, at assessment centre, or some other way. So when they say we're looking for enthusiasm on the job description or advertisement, they don't mean you must put that on your CV because then we'll guarantee an interview. What they mean is that we'll have ways of assessing that in our own good time, thank you very much. What I really want to see is evidence of your ability to perform the job, which can be proven on the CV, so that I can make a decision as a recruiter or hiring manager as to who on earth I should interview. Because I'm not interviewing 150 people. I want to interview 5 or 10 people at most. So I've got to whittle that number down. How am I going to make that decision? Well, it's not made any easier if you just force feed a whole heap of rubbish in front of them. In fact, it's dead easy to reject people like that. So, bit strong view, I know, but quite passionate about it, and you can see why if you compare what you've probably got at the top of your CV, if you have such a statement, with what's on the screen right now, and try and sort of interpret it for your own sector. All that behavioural stuff has no place on the CV. So that's the first section of the CV, professional or executive summary or personal profile, whatever you want to call it. but it's what you are, what you're good at, what's your proposition, why you're there, what's the return on the investment you're going to give or offer somebody in theory, and aligning that with what the marketplace is looking for, but technical and functional skills, not behavioural skills. We're going to go through the second area. So I mentioned these three things to get the business case sorted. So we're building this business case. The first bit was that opening statement. The second bit is an area we call key skills, areas of expertise. Again, doesn't really matter what you call it within reason. It's the content that's key. We'll talk through this, and then I'll show you a real-life example so you can see how it sort of all hangs together. The comment at the bottom of this slide right now is really important, but seemingly very obvious. And it sort of reinforces what I was just saying about recruiters having to make decisions and hiring managers make decisions. Some folk get confused. They think they'll get their great opportunity to explain all the gaps on their CV, which they freely admit exist, at interview. And that's fine if they get the interview, but unfortunately most of those people fail to get the interviews, but still keep maintaining the fact to people like us that they will clarify all the missing details at interview. The harsh reality is, of course, if you're getting anywhere near the level of applicants that go for most jobs around UK and Europe at this moment in time, chances of getting interviewed are pretty slim anyway, of course, just statistics just make that so. But the recruiters and hiring managers on the other end of the process, the only way they've got to make a decision about you as an individual is what you send them on your CV. And there is no crystal ball. There's no magical way that the recruiter or hiring manager can imagine or forecast or conjure up some picture that is any different from what you've sent on your CV. So if the message you're sending to them is ineffective or partial, i.e. not complete, or not addressing the needs that they have and the expectations they have for skills and proof and evidence of success, if you're not doing that, there's no way on this earth that a recruiter is going to fill in the gaps. They don't have the time and don't have the inclination and not being paid to do that. They're being paid to take the applicants as presented, whittle them down to a manageable chunk and move forward. Your job is to get into that manageable chunk, and the only way you're going to do that is with a strong business case as to why on earth they should do that for you. So make it easy for them and give them the evidence they're looking for. So for the mathematicians amongst you, you might say, oh, well, if 92% of recruiters and hiring managers can only make that decision, what about the other 8%? Well, it's the other 8% of people who may already know you. So they don't need a CV to judge whether you're relevant to interview or not, because they might have already seen you a month ago or a year ago or 2 weeks ago, whatever. Or they may have been referred to you by word of mouth, which is great if that happens and it gets you interviews. But if it's just you should check out Joe Blogs, and then they say send your CV, and your CV is not very good, then of course it's just going to result in the same disappointment. So it's a really important point. Never assume that what you're sending people will magically be unfolded or dug into or analysed anything deeper than the harsh facts you've presented on page. So what's this area, key skills expertise? Well, it's very briefly a menu of the things you've got to offer. It's a great area to customise your CV, as you'll shortly see on the example I'll show you. And it's a great area for reflecting what this target audience, be that recruiters, employers, or a combination of the two, are actually looking for. But remember, this is all about technical and functional skills, not behavioural stuff. In today's modern world, your CV, as soon as it leaves your, well, it's an outbox of sorts, I guess, where you apply for a job, it's going to hit some kind of electronic facility. Now, it's going to be either a job board database, a recruiter's database, or both. An employer's database. Increasingly, employers have all sorts of wonderful systems to track their own candidates and job applicants. LinkedIn, whatever, but somehow it's going to be electronically stored. By getting this section of the CV right, not only is it contributing to the business case for the reasons I've said already, it's also going to help get your document picked out electronically more often, because it's going to contain keywords and phrases which many of you will have heard all sorts of stuff about, I'm sure. But it is really important because recruiters and employers will use keywords and searches to pull out people from databases, particularly if the applicant count's very high and they want to try and whittle it down electronically. You need to have a reasonable chance of getting picked out purely on the basis of people entering skills. Typically, I'm just going to fling a few examples up on the screen before we look at the real-life example. This is the kind of format I'm talking about. Imagine a series of bullet points, 5 to 7 down the left-hand side of the page, 5 to 7 down the right-hand side of the page, with 2, 3, 4 word key skills. Now, again, this is not an excuse. Where most people go fatally wrong with this is the ones they put on their CV are the ones they think, oh, it's dead easy. I've got great interpersonal skills. I'm enthusiastic. I'm committed. So if they've not mentioned all that horrendous stuff in their opening statement on their CV, this is the time when they normally fall foul and stick a load of bullet points with all these unprovable skills. So what I'm not saying is that it's not that they're not admirable skills, those behavioural things. Of course people want folk that are enthusiastic and committed. That's not the point. The point is putting them on your CV is not helping your cause in one iota. It just doesn't add up. So focus on the functional and technical skills. So if you're a project manager, Prince 2 project management. If you're a software tester, ISEB. If you're MBA qualified, you might want to mention it here if not in the opening statement, or the ones you can see on the screen, or examples that are similar to that. Let's take a look at an example of a real-life CV so you get an idea about how it sort of all works. So let's just take a little while to refresh. What you should see on your screen now is it's actually the guy that runs our business, Matt. I should stress, actually, I'm using Matt's sign-on this evening, which I forgot to mention, so you might see references to Matt all over the screen in terms of who the speaker is. It's not Matt, it's me, Alistair, and Matt's, in effect, my boss. So this is his CV. It's a real CV. The content is valid, but it's the best example to show because it doesn't threaten anybody's data protection or identity. So we talked about the exec summary. That's his opening statement. Again, if you want to read it, you can read it, but it's got the what's his value proposition, what's he good at, and we're assuming it's aligned to the hot skills in his marketplace. Then this bullet point area, you can see for yourselves, Matt's stretched it to about as far as you'd want to go in terms of number of bullets, 7 down the left, 7 down the right. There's no real answer. I mean, 2 bullet points is not, but 50 is not good. So it's just a sane, logical number, and as I said, between 10 and 14 individual points is probably where you want to be at. And they are technical or functional skills. All of them could be proven on the CV if he wanted to prove them. And at the very worst, they could be proven at interview. And ask yourself that question. If there's anything on your CV that you cannot prove on the CV, and at the very latest prove at first interview, it probably ought not to be on the CV. Hence, enthusiasm is a really weak one, because you might argue you could get across that at first interview, but it's unlikely, to be honest. And it's certainly not going to be provable on the CV, that's for sure. So there's the first 2 sections. Now you'll see lurking at the bottom of that CV the 3rd section called Career Highlights. So let's talk about that for a little while, and then we'll regroup. So just quick reflection. We're talking about building a business case on your CV. 3 points to that. This is the 3rd of the 3 points, Career Highlights. We've had 1 professional summary, 2 bullet points of key skills. This is the 3rd, Career Highlights. And a quick also reminder for those that were late joining, if you want to ask any questions, because it's audio one way only and I'm rattling through this stuff at a fair old pace, just scribble, metaphorically scribble, type in a question into the toolbar facility you've got, and then when we get to the end of the session tonight, I'll let everybody know. Those that want to hang on and listen to the answers, more than welcome to stay, and I'll just rattle through those one by one. So Career Highlights. This links really to this proof/evidence theme that I've started to build up and talk about. So far, you could argue on the CV, we've made some claims. I'm fairly confident there are a lot stronger claims than most people would have on their CV. So we've left out the behavioural stuff. We've talked about the value proposition, things that this person's good at, key skills. And you could fairly argue, okay, where's the evidence? Most people don't provide enough evidence on their CV, but that's a fair comment. Where's the evidence? Career Highlights is the place to bring evidence into focus. And it's a really good way of providing real-life examples to back up claims you've made. Consequently, my sort of tongue-in-cheek remark right at the opening session of this, or opening point of this session was, yeah, we've got some published authors on board who actually work for us. It is really important that you can write good content to get a good CV. So if you really want to be anal about it, you need to write good content. If you just slap down text and in today's marketplace, I mean, you may get lucky, but you really do have to think about these things, as will become apparent. We use a methodology which is not unique to us. It exists in all walks of life. You may have heard of this before, and there are variations on the theme. But we use a methodology called STAR, which stands for Situation, Task, Action, Result, and it's a great tool for breaking down complex events, reassembling them into a nice, concise manner, in this context, in writing, but actually can be used equally well verbally to deal with competency-based questions later on in the application process when you get to interview or assessment centre. And the principle here is that we're wanting to provide evidence of, in this case, Matt's CV. Let's remember Matt, we looked at his CV. He's made some claims which you might have seen about him being able to affect change and transformation and doing this and doing that. We're now going to look at ways that he could prove that, and therefore how you could prove it as an individual to your target audience using the STAR methodology. And so up on screen now is a career highlight, one career highlight from Matt's CV. Again, I'm not going to go through it verbatim, but I will explain the sections. So the situation is the describer, if you like, the headline, the scene setter. And that is that in this particular incident or event, ERAC, by the way, stands for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. So Enterprise Rent-A-Car acquired an unprofitable competitor that needed basically sorting out. That's the situation. So anybody, you don't need to know the detail, that's not important, but it explains to somebody why on earth this thing is relevant. What was it all about? The second sentence is the task, and that is the responsibility resting on, in this case, Matt's shoulders at that moment in time. So he was an operations manager and he needed to do some stuff. The actions are the things that he did to affect change or to move the situation from point A to point somewhere else in the alphabet. And there are a list of things you can read at your own leisure. And then the final sentence is the result, and that is that he succeeded in rebranding the business, achieving a certain level of profitability within a certain time frame. So 6 months it took, very complicated probably, lots of heartache, roller coaster ride. People don't need to know the detail, that's not what it's about. It's just the proof to say, here's a concise example in enough space to give it meaning, but not so much as to bore the what's it off people. Get a message across, the proof to back up that claims that Matt's made on his CV earlier actually can be justified. Now typically on a normal person's CV, and definition of normal is interesting, but let's say a normal permanent style, permanent employee, we'd probably put 3 career highlights on a CV for reasons that will become clear shortly. It's enough to get the message across, to give a variety, to give some spice if you like, but not so much as to bore people rigid. So follow that writing approach, use STAR methodology. It's a really good way of being able to give evidence to support claims. Now, again, a lot of people tend to ask at this stage or wonder, yeah, but I don't know what I've done, or I'm in a menial job, their definition, not ours, or I've only just graduated and don't really have any career experience. Now, you have to remember, I have to plough a line amongst so many different types of folks, so there's always around all of those issues. If you've just graduated, you focus less on career highlights, of course, because you don't have a career. You focus on the competences being sought by a target audience, which may include something like project management, for example, which may, or evidence of project management, which may then point to the fact that when you arranged a student union function or a comedy night or something, you were involved in organising. So you draw out of your experiences from wherever they may have been encountered and examine all of those things for competences that would make sense to your target audience. Now that is quite a tough job. It's easy to say, relatively easy for us now because we've been through these processes time and time and across all walks of life. But for individuals, that's sometimes a bit of a challenge. But if you do that, I guarantee you'll be more successful because you're presenting to your audience what they want to see. You're giving them the evidence for them to think, "Phew, this person stands out. They've done stuff that we're interested in." Not, "I wonder if they've done stuff, and to be honest, I can't now be bothered because there's just no evidence to make me feel comfortable about this individual. I'm going to reject them." It's very hard to start rejecting somebody who would appear to be an ideal fit for the role. So if you get this done properly, you are creating the impression that you are a good, if not ideal, fit for the role, building the business case. Okay, a few words of caution about this, though, because in fairness, quite a few people give this a stab. A fair few people will already have achievements, possibly. Most people would maybe put key achievements or achievements on their CV. But you have to be very careful. If you pick the wrong examples, it actually makes it look worse than putting any example at all. So be very careful about the examples you select. Linked to that, they need to be relevant and targeted in the sense that just because you enjoyed a particular project or something that really stands out in your career doesn't mean to say your target audience will find it as compelling or relevant. So again, think really hard. What are the people recruiting for this job looking for? What have I got in my toolkit to go up against that? So a bit of an exaggeration, but to make the point, if you're in IT and your biggest career highlight was when you launched Windows 95 to the masses in your particular business, and you really want to get that message across and you talk about Windows 95 with a passion, don't expect to get forward anytime soon as far as interviews are concerned, because of course Windows 95 is by definition ancient. I don't even know anybody who uses it, but there are people out there going to market with that kind of extreme. They were really impressed, or they remember, or they've left it on their CV, some event that they're really, really proud of, rightfully so possibly, but it's just out of context. So it just doesn't resonate, and the recruiter or hiring manager is not going to necessarily think, well, if they can do it with Windows 95, surely they could do it with Windows 7 or 8.1 or whatever. People tend to look at the negative side and they'll think, Christ, this guy or gal is out of the arc, therefore reject. Sadly, that might well be true. So think very hard about the examples. And another thing, a lot of people read that example I showed of Matt's and say, oh yeah, but I'm in an admin job and I'm a small cog in a massive wheel. Again, fair comment, but everybody's done something that you can describe, or nearly everybody's done something, or you can examine it in a particular way. Don't feel conscious of the fact that just because you've got a fairly, what you might judge as a fairly menial role where you don't make a big contribution, that's not the point. It's all relative. You just find the bits that your target audience are looking for and then write something that fits that. You don't have to have a world-changing result at the end of each career highlight. Interestingly, this is where we spend most of the time with our clients, thrashing around trying to identify what they've done that's worthy of mention. It's not so much that the examples aren't there with people, it's more about the relevance of them and the testing of that, and then the digging around what were they actually involved with, so that we can put their achievements in the best possible light. But a really important area. So as I say, focus on, get 3 of those examples on your CV. It'll help make a strong business case. Let's take a look at Matt's example again, and I'll just reduce the screen slightly. So you should be able to see all 3 sections that we've been talking about, I've been talking about, that form the business case. I'll just let you quickly read that whilst I grab some lubrication. Okay, so interestingly, another question to ask yourself is, where do you currently open up on your CV telling people where you've currently worked? If you've noticed now on Matt's CV, we're on sort of 3/4 of the way down page 1. You still don't know where, apart from the fact that, I've told you that Matt's my boss, so you've got a clue as to where he works. But actually, he hasn't described where he's working yet, and that's deliberate. And it's deliberate because where you currently work is not necessarily the most compelling part of your business case. It may be. There are cases where that might be true, but there are other ways of dealing with that. But for most folk, you're not working in brands big enough to knock people off their feet. And in some cases, you'll be working for companies that nobody's ever heard of. doing a job with maybe a strange job title. So leading with that on your CV is not very productive. Focus on the stuff that's going to make a difference. Build your business case. Business cases are built by leading people down a sort of a story, which is, this is what I am, these are the skills I have, here's the proof to back it up. It's a really good way for those people who've got challenges in their career, either because they've had to take gaps, they've had periods of unemployment, contractors are slightly different, which I won't get into right now, but there's a different way of dealing with that kind of gap. You've had to care for a relative, anything like that. This helps, it won't eradicate those kind of issues, but it helps present a stronger message about what you're capable of before you hit people between the eyes in terms of who you have most recently or are currently working with. It's really important. Okay, quickly, we're going to take a look at some other sections of the CV with a few points, and then we'll move into to LinkedIn. So, again, I'll show you Matt's example shortly, but as far as the career history is concerned, i.e. where have you been working to gain the experience that you've just spent some time talking about, building this business case, then, of course, you need to start in, I say of course, most people do this, some don't, but you start with the most recent or current job and then work backwards. You focus in detail on the last 8 to 10 years roughly, if you've got a career that's long. Obviously, if it's only 3 or 4 years, you detail everything. Don't want to take up too much space, it's relevant. But if you've got a career that's 15, 20, 25, 30 years long, don't focus too much detail on it because it just doesn't help your case. Nobody's going to get an interview these days, with very few exceptions, based on what happened in the 90s or the 80s or the 70s or the 60s even. It's just not going to help. So focus in detail. I'll show you roughly how much shortly. Last 8 to 10 years, give or take. And within that detail, a bit of background. Who on earth are you working for? What are they about? Don't assume people will know. Don't assume people will look. They certainly won't look, that's for sure, unless you're only one of a handful of applicants. So if there are a lot of applicants for the job, people will just not give a monkeys about who you work for unless you make it very clear. So give some structure, some scope. How did you fit in? What are you judged on? Some duties and responsibilities, but a fair balance of achievements. What have you done with those duties and responsibilities that differentiates you from people with the same duties and responsibilities? That's really important. For your earlier career, so for those people with a career more than roughly 10 years in terms of length, just a line for everything. Again, fairly controversial sometimes. People say, hey, yeah, but it's really important what I did in 1983. Well, I'm afraid it isn't, not for your interview getting. So just a line, date from, date to, employer, job title, end of. If you want to question me on that later, by all means do, but that's where it needs to be at. Yes, of course, you need to detail your education. Now, for those that have just graduated, who are probably opening up their CV with their impressive qualifications, and which they may well be, and I don't want to take anything away from those, but they're not your most differentiating quality unless you've got interstellar qualifications that have almost broken all records. Most people leave university with something to claim about, and of those, literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands, will have a 2-1. Fair few will have firsts. So you've got to be really at the top end to make a claim out of that. And there are other ways of getting that message across anyway. So don't lead with your education. If you've got a career you certainly don't want to be doing, there are other ways of getting across your academic achievements. So qualifications tend to go towards the back of the CV rather than the front. Ditto training, professional development, etc. Same again, I hinted at this really early on in the session, personal details. But other than your name and contact details, our argument is don't skewer your chances of being selected for interview because of somebody's assumption about where you lived, and that unfortunately does happen, rightly or wrongly. So don't be in a postcode lottery. There's no reason you should open your CV other than convention, because it's just the way people have already done it, with all of your personal details, your postcode, your address, marital status, date of birth. Yeah, all of that's irrelevant to getting an interview. So don't put it at the front. Build your business case. Give the space to that. Another a classic one in the sense of, you know, all those behavioural skills I talked about earlier, enthusiasm, dedication, working in a team or as an individual. The other classic that people put on their CV, but probably don't ask themselves why and for what relevance, is the references available on request. And probably 80-something% of you will have that on your CV. Why shouldn't it be on there? Well, because it's totally meaningless. It's not going to get you an interview unless you've, and the only exception to this is if you've been specifically asked to put references, fair dues. But if not many people are specifically asked to do that on your CV. But if you are, adhere. If not, don't bother. It's wholly pointless, taking up space, could be better used for other things. If a recruiter or hirer wants to take up references, they will do so whether they're available on request or not. You'll be asked for them at a later stage. Far more useful is to put some testimonial evidence on your CV. If you've got a LinkedIn profile and have got recommendations, copy and paste the whole thing or elements of to build your business case. So it's got to be relevant and appropriate and from good people, as it were, the right people. But if you have it, if you have that content, get it on the CV. And lastly, again, a bit of a controversial one, this, because people say you should do it, but again, ask yourself why. Hobbies and interests. I'll argue and only put hobbies and interests on your CV if they materially influence the business case for why somebody should interview you. There are some exceptions, well, sorry, the kind of exceptions I mean by that are if you're changing career, you've got no practical experience in the area you'd like to work in. So again, stupid example, that checkout operator / nuclear submarine captain transformation I talked about earlier. If, for example, you really wanted to try and make that happen, and the only thing you had at your disposal was a passionate interest in nuclear submarines for some strange reason, then fine, put it down as an interest. It might at least garner a smile on the face of the whoever looks after the submarines in this country. Who knows? Yeah, if they were really desperate, they might just say, look, let's give them a shot. So, okay, it's a stupid example, but I've actually seen people get interviews who were moving out of selling soft drinks to selling aquatic products because the transferable skill was a sales bit, of course, and they got a good message across about being a good salesperson. But what clinched it was the fact they had an absolutely passionate interest in all things aquatic. And that was the thing that flipped it, because they were up against people who hadn't mentioned that. There was no link. So they weren't up against people who'd come from the aquatic market already. They were up against other salespeople from other industries. But the clincher was this passion as an interest. So that's relevant and builds your business case. Supporting a football team, going to the cinema, reading books, cooking, if they're not linked to your career objective, they're probably not going to help you. And in some cases might actually harm you, strangely, but I don't have time to go into that right now either. So a quick moment of reflection before we talk about LinkedIn and wrap this thing up. You should now have a reasonable idea about some questions to ask yourself to judge whether you need to take any action with your CV. So if you're getting interviews sufficiently to get you the opportunities you like, happy days. If you're not, bit of a red cross, give it some respect and think about it. So are you getting interviews, yay or nay? If you're getting interviews, are they sufficient to give you a reasonable return on the investment, i.e. to get you second interviews, assessment centres and job offers? So this is the acid test. Look at the number of interviews you're getting against the applications you're making. If you're not getting enough interviews, I can virtually guarantee to all of you that are affected in that way, it's the CV that is the problem. Ignore what people are telling you and focus on, is my CV up to the mark or not, based on what this guy Alistair has been telling me for the last hour. If it's not, it's probably because it's not building a business case. So again, just ask yourself the question, am I presenting to my target audience a nice, logical business case or not? And if I'm confused or not sure about that, get somebody to check it out for you, send it to us, we'll check it, and I'll give you an honest assessment. And part of that business case will be, does your CV contain relevant evidence of your ability to actually achieve? So if you're a salesperson, you better have on your CV some evidence to prove you can sell things, either against target or opening new customers. If you're a project manager, delivering projects on time and within budget. If you're a teacher, being able to take people from key stage level X to Y or to improve the average pass rate, you've got to have evidence of your success because you're going to be up against people who are making those claims. Once you've got that kind of raw data, you can then say, okay, if everything is fine and I'm getting interviews, you don't need to do anything, and you're lucky. Probably not many of you out there, but that would be a fair judgment. If you need to do something, you either fix it yourself by following these steps and taking a long, hard think about it, or you get professional help and you get somebody to take a look at it. And if you're starting to think along those kind of lines, then it will be worth hanging on, because at the end of this session, we'll give you a path to getting professional help at a substantially discounted rate compared to normal prices, which is part of the benefit of being invited by WebRecruit this evening. So, only a couple of things I want to talk about the CV before we get into LinkedIn, and that pretty much the two things that are most important: spelling and the number of pages. Spelling is critical. It's an instant rejection for most recruiters currently, and probably for the foreseeable future, and indeed hiring managers, or any serious grammatical error. It's too easy to reject people when there are 100 applications. Nobody's going to criticize a recruiter for having rejected somebody with an error on their CV, so be very careful about that. The kind of people that normally make that mistake are unfortunately the ones that say on their CV, good attention to detail. That is one of those behavioural traits that is dead easy to prove, but in the wrong way, unfortunately. Very few people will accept that explanation or skill if your CV is perfect. It'll just go unnoticed. But if you've said, because I always look for these, if I get a CV where it says good attention to detail, I give it an extra hard long look, because nearly always I find something wrong, and then they're blown out the water. Number of pages is a bit of an urban myth in the UK at least, and most of Europe. Folk go around with an idea that it should be X number of pages, unless you're specifically asked again. So if you're asked to submit on a certain length of document, adhere. If you're not, there is no evidence at all to suggest that a well-crafted CV that's 2, 3 or 4 pages even will not hit the spot. Again, I don't have the time to go into the nuances of that right now, but that is the fact. We've never had anybody come back to us and say, you're a bunch of so-and-sos, you've given me a 3-page document, it demands a 2-page, the market demands a 2-page document, therefore I want my money back. That just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. It's all about quality of content. Quickly then, LinkedIn, because there's some really important things here. If you're going to make the most of yourself in the job market, obviously the CV is still critical and probably the prime driver behind success, but LinkedIn is rapidly closing the gap for a number of reasons. Comment at the bottom in red. You remember I said most recruiters and hiring managers can only judge you based on the contents of your CV. Of that chunk, most of them will then go and suss you out on LinkedIn, probably some other social media as well, truth be told, before inviting you for interview. So if you've got a good CV, good enough to get you an interview, but for some strange reason your LinkedIn profile isn't quite there, you can lose it at this stage. That happens. Conversely, if you've got a poor CV right now and you've just replicated it in LinkedIn, which is what most people do, it's probably not going to help your cause. So LinkedIn is a tool. Again, I don't have the time to get into a big debate about whether you should be on it or not. Suffice to say, if you're in a commercial, mainstream, professional function, our argument would probably be, if you're interested in building a profile and getting noticed, you probably should be on LinkedIn. If you want to question that or debate that or have a will it really suit me, or I'm afraid or conscious of this, fine, come to us separately, we'll have a talk about it. We're not saying you must be for all reasons, we're just saying it probably helps you, but there are exceptions to the rule. Unfortunately, dumping your CV into LinkedIn, however much it might induce you to do that, is not a good idea. There are all sorts of reasons for that. Again, I don't have the time to go into the detail. Suffice to say, again, it isn't the same. You can't just dump it. That's not helping. Plus, of course, if you've got a bad CV and you're just dumping it into LinkedIn, you're just replicating the badness. A lot of people, there's lots of books available, online advice. There's all sorts of people floating around the country giving advice on LinkedIn. And our view is it's all about the content. It's just like your CV. So don't get wrapped up with being worried about your profile being scored by LinkedIn, which it does, and you may know this if you have a profile. There's expert level, advanced level, intermediate level, basic level. Don't worry about that too much. That's an indicator in terms of broadly how much content you've forced into LinkedIn. Of course, you're going to get scored for having given it lots of information. So it's the quality of the content that's absolutely critical. That will help you get noticed. It will help you get searched and visible. It will help people feel compelled to do something about you if they see your profile. Forcing it with every single piece of data under the sun is not going to help your cause, but automatically, I should say. The content is vital. And of that, just like the CV, there are 3 key areas of the CV I said to build a business case. LinkedIn is quite similar. The different sections, but there are 3 areas that really make a difference. The first one is the professional headline. I'll show you where that is because some people don't know what that is and where it is. But it's a piece of information under your name that's limited in text size, less than a tweet's worth of data. Don't have that as available now, looking, desperately seeking, please ring me. That sends the wrong message for obvious reasons. I'll show you what it needs to be later. And then underneath that, the main box that's sort of underneath the header part of LinkedIn is the summary, the introductory statement. That needs to be sorted. That's also a vital part of LinkedIn. Here's a real profile. Again, it's matched to keep consistency. The professional headline is the text that appears underneath his name. So by default, and again, I'm more than happy to go into this afterwards in the Q&A session if you like, because I'm just conscious of time. But by default, LinkedIn, when you set up your profile, it will encourage you, and it even has a little tick box saying, okay, is this job the one you're currently doing? Are you currently there right now? And you say yes. And it will say, would you like me to populate the professional headline with this information? And you say yes because it's easy, saves time, you want to get off and do something else, job done. Most people fall into that trap. Unfortunately, that doesn't present the best information for you, particularly if you've got an odd job title or work at a business that nobody's ever heard of. Because all it does is, or if you're looking to take your career from wherever you are right now to a more senior level, or particularly if you've had a job recently, your most recent job or current job is beneath the level you'd like to be at or justifiably should be at because of the recession or redundancy or whatever. If you go to market with your name and then straight under it the message that's least appealing, it doesn't help your cause. So get that text sorted out, and when we're rebuilding LinkedIn profiles, we just make sure that in effect it's your value proposition statement. It's almost the reason why you're on this planet. In Matt's case, driving success in the job market. So nothing to do with his job title, nothing to do with where he works. But most people have in their job title and their current employer. That's not a business case. That's just a statement of fact. The summary bit, as highlighted now on the screen, reads similarly, but not exactly the same as the CV's professional statement, professional summary, exec summary, whatever you want to call it. It's a similar message, but it's not exactly the same, and it's written in a different tense, interestingly, as well. So you'll notice here Matt is using I, whereas on his CV he was not using either I or his name. As regards position, so you'll know that LinkedIn, for those that have a profile, you can enter in as many jobs as you've done, all the gory details, the dates, etc., etc., etc. Again, our recommendation is, and most evidence seems to point at, you don't need to provide lots of detail, not as much detail as you would on a CV, just the summary. And there's a really interesting area which most people don't use, but if you've written good, strong career highlights on your CV, LinkedIn is a brilliant place to get those down. You can have a lot more of them for a start. You're not limited to 3. And they help build your business case. So we've talked about 3 areas. We've talked about the professional headline, we've talked about the summary, and we've talked about projects on LinkedIn. They are the 3 areas on LinkedIn that if you focus on will make the biggest difference to your profile. Projects, if you go and edit your profile, for those that have a LinkedIn profile, so this is my profile now because I can't access Matt's obviously, so you have to go into edit profile mode. Then on the right hand side somewhere, as I've highlighted, there's an option marked projects. You click on that, you get a screen like this. It allows you to enter the title for the project, but you have to give it a title. So you could call it, like in Matt's case where it was enterprise rent-a-car, transforming the business, returning to profitability. You can enter something like, you could be very sort of tabloid about it or broadsheet, but it's something to business transformation or business turnaround or returning profitability to a poor company or words to that effect. Something that grabs the attention. You can link, incidentally, you can link the project to a particular job that you've had, so it all works out well and links back through the profile, and then you provide the description. So that would be the text that we showed earlier following the STAR methodology that you could actually just copy and paste this time around. That could literally be dumped in here. It works really well. And finally on LinkedIn, before we go back to Matt's CV, you can reorder all the sections. They're all well, most of them I should say. You can drag and drop them. LinkedIn's default setting is not the end of the world by any means, in fairness, but by the time you've played around with it, added the projects, done a few other bits and pieces, the way it defaults is not the best way to build your business case. So we always reorder the sections for our clients to make a stronger business case. And you'll be amazed what difference it makes. It really does. The hits you get via LinkedIn, it's so important now. Recruiters and hiring managers use it so much to drive jobs, to seek for talent, that you need, if you're on it, you need to be on it well so that it works for you. And then I guarantee your hits and people contacting you through LinkedIn will escalate dramatically, just as getting interviews through a well-written CV. Just show you quickly Matt's CV again, just to sort of wrap up on how it all works together. So on the screen now is the complete page 1 of Matt's CV. First 3 sections build a business case. Down towards the bottom of the page is where he starts talking about his career history. It is important that's on page 1, but it's not important that it's top of page 1. And then if we look down onto page 2, you can see a continuation of the career history bit. So in Matt's case, he's built quite a lot of evidence to say, okay, this is what I'm responsible for, these are the things that I've done, this is what I do, this is my team. But then there's also almost as much space given to achievements. And that's important. Now this varies for everybody. So this is not a template for success in the sense you've got to match the number of bullet points that Matt's got. It's so bespoke. But what I'm trying to draw attention to is the fact that given Matt's got a fairly lengthy career, but not in that many jobs in that time, he can give quite a lot of detail to his most recent current role. You'll see at the base of this page 2 an earlier job that he had with a different company when he was in proper paid employment, so to speak. So you can see that. He's again describing that to some degree. And if we flip to page 3, the final page of Matt's CV, that continues towards the top of page 3. Not as much detail about his current role, but still enough. Then his earlier career is just a one-liner. Now, notice Enterprise Rent-A-Car, we drew out a career highlight, but actually, on his CV, Enterprise Rent-A-Car is just a line. And that's really one of the good things about those career highlights. You can pick any highlight you like. You don't have to reference it by date or time. You just bring it to the forward on page 1. You avoid referring to time, but it looks highly relevant and appropriate, helps build Matt's business case. The fact that it occurred in the 90s doesn't matter one iota, because he could still go and do those same things in a similar environment and it would still be relevant. And then you see education, personal details and recommendations. And again, I mean, structurally that's very similar to most of the clients we write CVs for, but of course the content varies by individual. So that's Matt's CV in 2 3/4 pages in effect, but a 3-page document, it would work very well. Most of our clients probably have a document very similar in terms of length and the style and the content, in terms of the structure of the content, I should say, but of course they're all bespoke things. So if you have started to think, okay, well I do need to do something, if you've thought about doing it yourself, that's absolutely fine. You've got much stronger clues now about what to do. If you're thinking about getting us, we'd rather it be us than anybody else out there in fairness, but if you're thinking about getting professional help, just quickly, this is how we work so you know, and then I'll explain the deals available. So we're not in the business of amending CVs. So some people come to us and say, can you tweak this or check it and just make it slightly better? It just doesn't work. That's not actually technically possible. You've either got a CV that's effective in the marketplace or you haven't. It's that black and white. And if you haven't, it needs a root and branch reconstruction, and that's what we do. So we start everything from scratch. We don't amend things. We spend a couple of hours on the phone or Skype or whatever with you, extracting all the raw data from you, clarifying whether what you're trying to do is sane and rational, work out, if you don't already know it, most people don't, but have a pretty strong clue, I guess, what your value proposition is, how you should be branding yourself. Again, it's sort of you are a product or service to the marketplace concept and how you should be explaining that. And then we can assess the kind of skills you've got, the achievements you've got, and write them up so that, in effect, what you're getting is a strong business case. It represents what you're capable of in the marketplace far more effectively than you had beforehand. And genuinely, if you have got a strong business case in the marketplace, not only will you get more interviews, that's absolutely proven, that's not just a smoke and mirrors, that happens. But interestingly, for those people where it's important, if you're trying to just get a bit more senior of a role, or a role that seems to have eluded you until now, having a stronger business case, as long as we know that's what you're aiming for, and we can position the document and LinkedIn as such, it'll get you access to interviews for better, if that's the right word, jobs as well. Now, if that's all true, and you start to think, okay, that sounds plausible, then you can do the maths as to whether you should be investing in it or not. Because if you can get a job any quicker, if you're out of work and need a job, you get a job a week or two quicker, there's a financial amount attached to that. If you get a better job, ditto. So you can work that out. You're able to force feed you with that. And if you're interested in that, then you should know that until a date that I will reveal very shortly, ordinarily to get your CV, and this is for anybody with, I should hasten to add, anybody with sort of more than 7 years work experience, which is where yeah, most people are probably, but if you're under that, you need to probably have to come and have a talk with us. But for 7 years plus experience of doing anything, ordinarily to get your CV and LinkedIn profile rewritten would cost through us $349 plus VAT. So it's not an inconsiderable amount of money. We know that. There's a lot of work involved. It certainly isn't the work of the moment. But we'll reduce that to $275 plus VAT, so a big saving for a limited period of time, and that is until a week tomorrow, in fact, Friday 14th of March. And if you want to be super precise about it, $23.59 on Friday the 14th of March. We always offer this as well at our webinars, and that is for the first 10 customers. It is strict because this is another 80 quid's worth of gear, but for literally the first 10 customers that sign up in that order, you get a free cover letter and access to our interview coaching system, which is a really nifty piece of kit that will help perform interviews, but in the privacy of your own home without anybody watching. Really clever piece of kit. So for the first 10 customers, they get that free. Now, it's important to say, people sometimes order this and they want to move ahead straight away, and we'll just operate first come, first served basis. So if you order quickly, you get the first slots. If, however, you want to order but not take advantage of it until 2 months hence, or months hence, or somebody even the other day ordered for, I think, a year ahead for some bizarre reason, I think they were traveling or something, you can do that. That's entirely up to you if you want to. So you can take advantage of the deal now or up until next Friday, but actually utilize it whenever you want within reason. You're under no pressure to conform. But as I've indicated, the process goes something like this. You say yes, we work with you, we extract the information we need, we build your business case, both CV and LinkedIn profile. If you're quick enough, you get the cover letter and the interview coaching package as well, and then you're good to go to market. And we'll go as fast or as slow as you need to within reason. You need to go to a special website for this offer, which I'll put on screen now whilst I'm talking. I'll try and multitask and copy and paste this so you can grab hold of it. So you can either write it down, or if you just bear with me, I'll just send this into the chat room and also the question and answer facility. There we go. So that's hitting the chat room now. Which hopefully you'll be able to see, and failing that, if you just bear with me, George, you've asked a question to which I'm going to reply and answer, which is in effect, I'll come back to your question shortly, but I'm just going to put that website address also in your question facility. I haven't ignored your question. So you need to visit that website before 23:59 on Friday 14th of March. Failing that, if there's anybody out there who's thinking, yeah, I want to do things myself, but I could do with a bit of a toe in the water, some help, we do a very cheap DIY pack which gives you some templates, workbook and some interview help for 18 quid if you include the VAT. That offer is also available via the same website link. And finally, if you're totally confused or bemused or intrigued or whatever it takes to help give you more information, then you can always email us. Either visit the website that's at the bottom of the screen or email the info at blah-de-blah-de-blah that's on the screen right now, and almost certainly the information will come through to me. It'll be one of my colleagues, but almost certainly most of that stuff comes through to me anyway, and I'm more than happy to help with any queries. So that's the end. I'm sorry we've overrun by a bit, and I do apologise for that. As I did say there was an awful lot to cover off, and sometimes perhaps a little bit ambitious, but hopefully you found that useful. Most people have hung on, which is encouraging. And I will now move on to the Q&A session. So just give me a couple of seconds whilst I shut down the sort of recording facility and all those bits and pieces. Oh, I should hasten to add, anybody who wants to see a recording of this, it has been recorded, and you'll get a link to that tomorrow morning at some stage, and then you can review it.